Hello everyone, welcome back to another installment here on the channel, Patreon and YouTube alike. We're going to go over everything you need to know to get started on your way to fighting the best you can fight at the Continentals coming up here in Europe. Going to be in Paris, I believe, and leading up, of course, into the North American Championship in January. A little bit less so about the North American one. We're going to have a little more data, a little more time to cultivate a metagame and actually have, maybe some shifts in the metagame, go back and forth on what's being played, and really kind of have a better understanding of how to attack the metagame. But for Europe, let's kind of dive into a bunch of new decks. I'm trying everything from A to B to X to Y to Z to 1, 2, 3, and beyond. The infinity symbols all combined. So I'm going to bring us 5 new decks here that I've built, and I want to take a moment to go over each of them. And these are all decks I'm considering and wanting to experiment with. I'm also putting out there for others to kind of expand upon. No one person can really develop an entire metagame. It's really hard to. So without further ado, let's start off with one of the more interesting ones, Brain Wald. So a little bit play on words, Oswald and Brainstorm, which is a card from Magic the Gathering. Hypnotic Deduction mimics that card to the T. It draws 3 cards and put 2 cards back on top of your deck. And the idea, of course, is to have an Oswald in play or set up an Oswald for the following turn where you then know the top card of your deck to flip over one of the more powerful items, whether it be a Popsicle or Inkcaster to kind of just continue to draw cards, or specifically Lucky Dime. Now, we've seen Lucky Dime in a lot of Sapphire decks as the closing card of choice. It does cost 7. That's one of its limiting factors, of course, being very high cost, uninkable. We kind of solve a lot of those problems here with this deck. Not only do we have the ability to play it for its full cost with a ton of acceleration, basically everything under the sun, 1 drip ahead, Sail the Azurite Sea, Tipo, and Fishbone Quill, all to make use of the fact that it's uninkable with Tipo and with 1 drip ahead, or with a Fishbone Quill, I should say. But we also have Hidden Inkcaster. Hidden Inkcaster, the item which draws a card when you play it, but also lets you say, hey, I can ink anything I want to. Ink doesn't matter. Uninkable or not, it can go straight into my inkwell. Totally fine. That also combos with the fact that it's an item for Oswald to flip over. This deck does have 20 items in it, 4 of all the big ones, and you'll notice a common themality with all the decks I'm showing here today. They are mostly 4-ofs, or as close to 4-ofs as I can get. Mainly because I think that when testing, you want to experiment with cards that are new, and you want to play the maximum copies of them to see if the strategy works. It may ultimately be correct to play fewer copies of certain cards in this deck, maybe not at all. But again, we're theory crafting, we're experimenting, we're kind of going to go through everything on the list you see here. So this deck, relatively straightforward, honestly. It is, just touching Emerald. There are other colors you can touch. You can play Steel for Popsicle, or the other Popsicle, in fact, Fortisphere. But I found that Fortisphere was the only Sapphire card I was actively looking to play. I put some filler cards in there, like Beast Mirror in some situations and things like that. You can play some removal and Tinkerbell, but I wanted to see the extremes. You want to see the extremes of these types of archetypes where you just do the most powerful thing you can at all points in times. And the best thing you can do is have Oswald flip over a Lucky Dime. You can do that on turn 3. That's the earliest you can get it going. And there are numbers of ways to get, not just 1, potentially 2 even, going on the early turns. So some of the sequencing there and some of the card choices we'll go over here. Ursula, it's pretty much going to be in every Emerald deck. I believe it is the consistently most played card in a color. I think that there's not a single Emerald deck that has not played for Ursula since its release, which is just how it's going to be. Very good, inkable answer that you can just throw away in a matchup where you don't need it, or it's some of the best cards you could do to interact with your opponent against Steel Song and the like. Be prepared as well. Chicha. So in addition to Oswald, we have another uninkable 2-cost card. There are a higher number of uninkables. I believe this is at 20, roughly. I could be off on the number by 1 or 2, but again, with Under the Sea, with Hidden Inkcaster, making cards like Under the Sea, Chicha, Oswald, Lucky Dime, and additional copies of Inkcaster. Just ink if you need to, as well as 1 drop ahead. In a pinch, it's fine. I have not had an issue. I've experimented some games with this in person. I've got a physical copy of it shuffled up, ready to go with some proxies in there. The uninkable count's not been too big of an issue. Chicha doubles as additional copies of Oswald in some capacity. Your deck is very linear. You don't have much flexibility in what you do. Your deck plays a lot of ink, and it just tries to flip over multiple copies of Lucky Dime to make either Bell or Tamatoa a quick endgame engine. Deck doesn't really do much else than that, and it tries to do everything it does really efficiently. Bell is a cheap enough threat to where you can just play it and then activate Lucky Dimes in the same turn if you have 10 ink. A little bit cheaper than Lucky Dime, and of course being able to play extra ink when you're having an Oswald in play has its benefits of flipping over more cards. What kind of item deck would we be, really, without Harem Flavor Sham? It is among the best cards in the game. I would say there's a really stiff competition between best Sapphire card, between Harem Flavor Sham and Sail the Azurite Sea. Those are the two best Sapphire cards, with the third one being Fishbone Quill, all included in this deck. The best 3 Sapphire cards in the game are in this deck, and that's really hard to argue playing in a Sapphire deck in this format without them. I will say, we'll see a deck here in just a little bit that actually has none of them, but that being said, Flavor Sham included in pretty much every item-based deck. Tamatoa, of course, again, rounding out the curve. Only 3. I didn't feel the need to have a ton of them. You do need to have a critical mass of other card types and acceleration pieces, so I decided that 3 was the right number. You'll see that there's 2 Under the Seas and 3 copies of both Tamatoa and Chicha. The Under the Seas seem like they might be necessary. I haven't got to experiment again too much. We're still a week away from the release here when this is being recorded, so they were functionally the 4th Chicha and the extra Tamatoa prior to the inclusion of Under the Sea. So if you want to just try it, face value, not have to worry about anything being aggressive. If you're planning on playing against a bunch of Ruby decks the entire tournament, you don't need Under the Sea that much. Maybe the Tamatoa and Chicha are just better. But they are the endgame engine, Tamatoa and Bell combined with Lucky Dime, really what you're trying to accomplish here. The main reason, of course, to be Emerald and play it over cards like Sapphire or anything else that may have items that you want to deal with or include in your deck is Hypnotic Deduction. Being able to set up Oswald, while not necessary for the card to be playable, it is a massive benefit. You can play it in the face of a lot of steel removal as well, where instead of leading on Oswald and then playing Hypnotic Deduction on turn 3 to then set up the Oswald ink triggered ability, you play Hypnotic Deduction on turn 2, and you put the card you want to flip over 2 cards deep, so that when you play your Oswald and having drawn a single card for the turn, the card you actually wanted to put into play, probably a Lucky Dime, is played for free right off the top when you play your ink for the turn. Good way to set that up, as well as if you ever have multiple copies of Oswald in play, you can put 2 items back on top. Additionally, cards like we'll get to Heart of Tafiti and One Jump Ahead, take the top card of your deck off. So while you don't get a full reset of the top of your deck with Hypnotic Deduction and just a singular copy of One Jump or Heart of Tafiti, there is the potential to use Hypnotic Deduction kind of as a draw 3, and then put 2 useless cards or cards that don't have as much value later in the game, like T-Pose, straight on top of your deck to be inked with One Jump Ahead to clear off and kind of dig deeper into your deck. So it's something to always be mindful of and keep in your arsenal as far as plays to be made. No real explanation needed for the rest of the kind of inclusions here. The One Jump, Sail, Popsicle, Inkcaster, Fishbone Quill, Heart of Tafiti. Heart of Tafiti is the only one where it may raise an eyebrow. You could try Great Stone Dragon. I felt Heart of Tafiti being more consistent of a card is really where I wanted to be with it. Entering the play and being able to be used immediately has some benefit. It is primarily there to help trigger, of course, Oswald and Chicha in the mid to late game, as well as help you get to your high ink costs without having to have drawn a Harem Flavor Sham, an Oswald hit that can kind of dig you even deeper. So that's why it's included here. Under the Sea, again, may not be necessary depending on how the metagame looks. Or maybe there's something more dramatic needed to be included to help fight the aggressive decks early. We're not sure what it looks like, so it's a good starting place to have a couple catch-alls and kind of develop from there. Lastly, of course, Lucky Dime. Yes, I have gone ahead and ordered copies 3 and 4 of Lucky Dime. I'm now the proud owner of 4 copies of Lucky Dime. I think I will need them if I'm playing Oswald. I don't feel like it's correct to play Oswald without 4 copies of Lucky Dime. I think that's the best card you can be playing off of it, and you want to have as many of them in your deck as you can. And in other variations of an Oswald deck, pairing a Sapphire with other colors, it may not be correct to play 4, but I also think that those versions are probably not as powerful, potentially, as this one could be. But having extra copies of Lucky Dime, I've even kept a Lucky Dime in my opening hand with this deck because I had Oswald, Hypnotic Deduction, and Lucky Dime. I knew I was going to put it into play on turn 3, so that's a benefit there that you don't often see. One kind of nuance to this deck I've also experienced where I have multiple pieces of acceleration. I have a Tipo, a One Jump, or Sail, and in conjunction with an Oswald, decks that are not playing Steel have a difficult time dealing with Oswald on turn 2, especially when you're going first. So there's actually a lot of scenarios where you don't play your acceleration piece on turn 2, you'd rather play Oswald, and then on turn 3, make use of the acceleration with One Jump, C, or Tipo to kind of get even further ahead. My favorite line, of course, being Oswald on turn 2, and either a second Oswald on turn 3, then play an Ink, and then sing 1 jump ahead, or you can play Oswald into Sail the Azurite Sea, play 2 Ink, get 2 activations, play another Oswald, and then sing 1 jump ahead. I think you get 4 triggers that way. Something like that. Crazy things you can do, 4 each way, but getting use of some of the cards there, getting more ahead on Ink is great. It is important to note that often in matchups that go long, you will need to remember somewhat the order in which some of your threats may be while you are kind of flipping cards from the top of your deck with Oswald. Sometimes you're putting the important ones to the bottom, and knowing how far down they are can be relevant. So something to keep in mind, and there was a consideration for cards like Visions from Beyond. If you wanted to make sure you have Oswald, be able to play Visions on turn 2 when you don't have one to find it, and then on turn 3 play Oswald and play an Ink is something I've considered. I found it to be a little too slow in theory. I will take some experimentation to really understand that, and if it's possible, you can maybe cut some cards for Visions to increase the chances there, or have it be Ink, of course. But what we're playing against, we really don't know. So the answers and what we need to find and what the deck's capable of doing, still unclear. But this is one of the more exciting decks I've tried out so far, and one of the decks I'm relatively scared of. It makes me really pretty frightened of Oswald. This deck, I will say, against any type of Ruby-based deck that's a little bit slower, whether it be the more traditional Ruby Amethyst mid-range or Ruby Sapphire Control, this deck has a very easy matchup against those decks, more so than Hyper Aggro even. Just no way for those decks to interact with what this deck is doing or to race them in any way, shape, or form. So very powerful in the face of a lot of control decks. Jury's still out against the aggressive decks or steel decks. Might be some of its bane, but again, for the European Continentals and the North American Continentals, the Continentals themselves are a very small metagame, so the pairings and the decks played are going to be hyper kind of secluded from what you may see at your locals or even at the DLC. People are going to be metagaming for each other because the amount of people and the people that make up the majority of the tournament are already predetermined. People know who is going and what they played to get there, and their play styles have a little bit of a tell there. But yeah, it's going to be very exciting. But let's move on to one of the next decks. And it will come as a little bit of a surprise to absolutely no one. Amber Steel. So, real talk here on this one. Steel Song got little to nothing from the set. Little to no cards that I want to include in a more traditional looking Steel Song deck that we've seen before with Prince Naveen's, Big Cindy's, Robin Hood Chains. That archetype, that deck got almost nothing. You may include some Lilos. We'll get to different versions of the deck eventually. Not in this video, but another one. But what it has made me do, since that deck got very little and the kind of things you can do to expand upon the strategy is relatively minimal and requires little testing, I think, has made me try and break the conventional theory with how to build Amber Steel decks in general. Some of the pivotable cards and key cards I usually start a lot of decks with, kind of help lineate what I want to play and how I want to play, and getting out of that habit is pretty important. Making sure you understand that there are different ways to play the game and different ways to play certain archetypes that may be more well suited to a metagame. This version here, very strong into the control decks, I believe. I think it has a very good matchup into Ruby Sapphire being more aggressive, and it still can keep the omnipresent looming threat of Cindy Storm or Cindy Strength on turn 2 against any of the aggressive decks that needs help clean up on. You'll see some of the newer cards. There's a fair few of them. I think there's 3 or 4 cards here. 3 cards. Lilo, the 1/2 that comes back forever and ever and ever, is fantastic. I believe it will be among the most played Amber cards in the game. I think it is a lot better than Daisy Duck's Impact was, and again, this is all strictly because it was inkable. Of all the cards to include in Steel Song, potentially, the more traditional versions, Lilo's the only one I can consider playing because it gives you some staying power into sweepers and going long against some of the Ruby-based decks. The other card to mention there is Calhoun, the 3/2 with Resist 1. That is quite impressive. There's kind of a rule where when I look at cards and how to determine if I think they're worth trying out or not. And some of the rules are, does it die to Cindy Storm / Diablo Storm, same kind of concept there. And if I quest with it early enough, does it just die and not take out the Mim Fox itself? Calhoun does both those things. It trades with Mim Fox, which is great, and it also doesn't die to Storm. It has Resist 1 on 2 health character. It's a very impressive stat line. There are other strategies you can include this in where, I've tried the Amethyst Cogsworth, which gives it Rush to get a surprise 2 lore out of nowhere, but Calhoun is a very impressive 2-drop, and what we were really lacking in this game, not set, not previous iterations, but this game, were 2-cost cards that were good. We haven't really seen too many. Some of them are very contingent on other things like Mim Snake. Flynn is fine, but really that's why you've seen Lantern in so many decks I've built, because Lantern is a way to ignore the usually shaky part of the curve and kind of gets to the mid to late game. The other new card is Pluto Guard Dog. I wasn't joking when I think this is the best steel card in the set. It is a 4-cost 5/5. It is a 4-cost 5/5. That's what Pluto is. It has bodyguard as well, potentially, if you wanted to. It doesn't have to be exerted. People need to remember that. Pluto does so much work at protecting against Maui. Maui is the last test on the spectrum of cards to make sure your cards are good against. Storm, Mimfox, and Maui. Pluto's good against all those, honestly. Sure, they can throw a small thing into Pluto and then have a Maui eat it. Totally fine. More than likely, that's 2 challenges in their entire turn, and you get to protect everything you have in play to that point. Pluto also has a ton of strength against some of the Ruby decks to check Sisus. That may be getting out of hand with Flynn if there's no Storm available, but also Pluto just has 5 strength to attack a castle. One of the biggest issues with Castle, Queen's Castle, being in the Ruby Amethyst decks is that in order to challenge it effectively, it usually required 2 to 3 characters, usually 3 or more characters to hit from Steel Song. And one of them, sometimes when it was 2, was a Cinderella Stouthearted, which is 3 lore you're giving up from this side, and a lot of cards are being invested, playing it to be prepared more so. So Pluto, being 4 cost, 5 strength, huge. It really, really makes cards like Queen's Castle less of a threat. While it still will be an issue sometimes, Pluto does a heck of a job cleaning up that mess there. But no, let's get back to the deck overall. Those are the new cards, the ones I'm really excited to try out, and I've done some kind of goldfishing, playtesting a little bit here, some webcam stuff, just with some people who are local to me and who've come by my house there. But so far, Pluto has been as good, if not better than expected. Really big fan. So what do we have here? We have a deck with 12 1-cost characters, Happy, Daisy, and Cindy. Cindy, Storm, and Cindy Strength are really too good to ignore. We don't need a very high song count for that to be good enough. It is just very efficient, and Cinderella is fine. It can be inked. It can be, just played as a singer there to get some extra ink out of the turn for the following turn. Daisy Duck is very effective at questing. It is a pretty good threat. Very good to be healed with Rapunzel, of course, the high willpower. Pluto and Lawrence all have that bonus there of having a lot of willpower to be healed up there. And Happy is a nice inclusion to do with Diablo, but also we're going to look towards the bottom right there, 7 Dwarves and Mine. In conjunction with Happy and Doc, we have 8 characters which can deal 2 damage, but if we look back to the previous deck we had just talked about, Oswald's going to be a pretty big threat in a lot of cases, and 7 Dwarves Mine can check every Oswald played ever. You can just pay 2, deal 1 damage to it. So the fact that there is a highly playable 2-cost character that people want to build their decks around in some ways, Dwarven Mine that just get to kill all of them every single time is a really impressive addition to the deck. And Happy, can check Diablo, can kill Diablos. Yeah, they can storm it, but that means they're not storming their Cindy or whatever, and it's only a 1-cost card. It's not like you're getting too big of a tempo kind of exchange there. But kind of rounding out what we were talking about before here, the game's 2-drops getting a big improvement. Prior to this set, Piglet and Smee were really the package that Steel Song or Steel Amber decks used to be aggressive. Lilo is, again, incredibly impressive. It gives staying power against the Ruby decks, really makes it hard for them to come back from. I've had a lot of situations where they Sisu you, that's the only thing they have going on. You bring it back, move it to Dwarven Mine, deal the Sisu 1 damage, they have to challenge Lilo, then you play a Doc, draw 2 cards, move the Dwarven Mine over, then deal 2, finish the Sisu. It really does have a lot of grinding potential, and it is going to be a problem people have to answer. There are certain songs, I think It Calls Me, the Amethyst song that shuffles 3 cards in your opponent's discard back, may be played in some Amethyst decks now to help combat Lilo. I think it just is going to be that big of a threat. But this deck, of course, again, taking a very aggressive stance, Lilo being a great addition to any kind of aggressive strategy. So is Lawrence, an efficient threat that can challenge most things really well, hard to take out pretty easily without damaging it first and throwing something away. Pete and Rapunzel kind of mainstays for this color pair. As we've seen before, Pete just being great at key turns, stopping Be Prepared's. We can deal with Sisus. We have high health characters. But Be Prepared still an issue at times, and just being able to protect for a turn may be all you need to really get through the game. Or if you're playing against a deck with Under the Sea, or maybe I don't know, there's a bunch of actions, I'm sure. Anything really stops it dead. And of course Pluto, the guard dog, the good boy, kind of rounding out the curve there. Just again, can't understate how impressed I've been with Pluto so far. It's just phenomenal. And of course, Strength Raging Fire, just another key piece of removal to use with Cinderella and the plethora of characters we have. There's no Whole New World. There's no Stitch, Rockstar Chain. This is an aggro deck, right? We're pretty much relying on Doc and Rapunzel to draw cards. That's it. That's fine. That's enough. We can play a game. You won't be able to grind as hard or go as long, and you may get ground out by certain, Amethyst decks drawing a ton of cards. Totally fine. But we are going to have a much better chance at beating up on the Ruby control decks than you previously had with Steel Song. I think the win percentage in that matchup is going to go considerably up with a version like this. But there's definitely, again, a lot of room to improve. This is just me breaking some of my own rules of how to play this strategy and adding some new cards I want to try out and see how it goes. But I have high hopes for this one. I think it's going to be pretty great. Give it a try. Let me know kind of what you think here. Just, again, everything is really 4 ofs across the board just to see if the cards, make sense together, work together, play well together. And we may find that maybe Cinderella is not needed to play Storm and Strength. Maybe Storm and Strength aren't really needed. Maybe this becomes more of a Mufasa build, and you just kind of use the aggressive undertone to the deck and cap off with Mufasa and Beast, Sad Beast, and just use that to be your card advantage engine. Maybe. Again, we're still pre-set release and trying stuff out. So try it all. I'm going to go on to another deck here. Speaking of Ruby Amethyst, let's see what happens when we take Ruby Amethyst and kind of put the pedal to the metal here. I want to be aggressive. I want to try and make this format as punishing to blue-red as I possibly can so that I can play normal Steel Song and beat all these aggressive decks. Just kidding. But that ultimately could be a thing. Who knows? We have, again, European Championships and then North American Championships almost a month later. So who knows how the metagame's going to evolve, what people think is correct. But this is another take on a different deck we haven't seen before. It uses a lot of the same... a lot of similar cards that we've seen in traditional Ruby Amethyst decks. There's no Friends on the Other Side, no Be Prepared, no Maui, nothing that costs more than 4. Much more aggressive, but not hyper aggro, not really invested or all in on the aggressive plan. It is aggressive, does have some removal, but it still can grind a bit. We have 4 copies of the library to go with our 16 one-cost characters. We have Moana, the 3/2, which I have picked for the best Ruby card in the set. And if it's not the best Ruby card, I think Wendy Darling might be. Sorry, Maui, Shark Maui. I'm not impressed. I think it's going to be a little bit too slow for you these days. But Moana. So talk about it. 1 cost, 3 strength character. That's phenomenal with Flynn Rider. Not many decks can produce a 3 strength character on turn 2 or 1. It's hard to do that. They have to have Smee, and if you're going first, it really is, very, very, very much they're pigeonholed into playing something like a Smee or Calhoun to really check that. But most of our decks not going to be able to do it. Moana does require some other things to go with it. Some pirates. That's why we're saying Michael Darling there. Pirates to make it be able to challenge. And also Wendy Darling requiring pirates to get a kind of buff. So there are 12 pirates in the deck. Whether or not that's enough, whether or not we need to include things like the Minnie Mouse, the 3/2 that returns locations, that could be the case. But this is where I'm at for now, the more aggressively slanted version. Wendy Darling is a very impressive card. I really wish there were a little bit more pirates to make it great. In Steel, Ruby Steel, which I will get to not today, but again, next video, Ruby Steel deck is incredible. The Ruby Wendy is a 2-cost, 2/2 evasive, 2 lore character most of the time. It checks Diablo, trades, it quests well against the aggressive decks, doesn't get hit by any of the rush things that we really have grown accustomed to seeing out of the control decks. And yeah, it's just a pirate it's a captain for Moana as well. If you need a captain to be able to make a challenge, that's your captain. Yeah, very impressive, and I expect to see Wendy Darling pop up quite a bit as the format develops. But this version's all about lore, right? So we have the 16 one-drop characters, followers, Broom, Michael, and Moana. Really, didn't mean to do that. I didn't realize there was a button on my mouse there. Cool. A lot of one-cost characters and the ability to kind of go very, very wide very quickly. So what do we do with all that? Well, we have a nice little 16-card package to help close the game out. The White Rose is a mini goat. I call it mini goat in my little notes on my phone when I was on a cruise a few weeks ago. I had no internet. I didn't remember the name of anything, so I just put mini goat. So it's my mini goat. Gains 1 lore. We also have Merlin, Super Goof, and Gathering Knowledge and Wisdom. There is a Thievery, I think the 1-cost ruby action that steals a lore, makes them lose 1, you gain 1. I don't quite think that's worth it. White Rose is getting a pass at only gaining 1 lore, where the other ones functionally gain 2, because it is a body in of itself. And I think it's just enough. But it is not unreasonable for this deck to be able to steal the game, from 14 lore. Maybe playing a White Rose, a Merlin trading off, and then a Goofy and a single quest getting in there is enough. Not to mention locations, which can be hard to deal with. Flynn and Sisu, of course, making their appearance. Sisu is just a very large character very early on, combined with Flynn Rider is on the play very hard for most people to deal with. And if we're trying to beat the Ruby Sapphire decks and also have game against anyone trying to go with big characters early, shift lines, Robin Hoods, Sisu is always going to be good. One of the most impressive cards, and probably the best Amethyst card in the set, Genie, the 2/4 I've talked about in the set review I did. It's really changing how I think this deck can be built, and one of the main reasons I wanted to be aggressive. I started this deck started this deck basically saying I wanted to include Moana, Flynn, Wendy, and Genie. Those are the 4 cards I wanted to start around, and this is where I ended up. Genie being, we don't see notably here. You'll take a minute just to realize there's no snake, fox, or rabbit. Those are 3 cards traditionally seen. Again, I'm breaking a lot of my own rules, a lot of rules we've seen the archetype, because there's no way to grow without trying new things. So we're just trying things out and seeing how it all appeals together. And again, a more aggressive stance has been seen. We've seen it more traditionally with more of the 3 lore characters and more Maleficence on 1 or things like that. But this is just, again, a more mid-rangey, kind of grindy, burnish package there, where we saw do well in Seattle. A different variation of this, of course, but this is a different take to that. But Genie, replacing itself is fantastic, evasive. Again, being able to deal with Diablo is nice if it's ever exerted, if Diablo's ever exerted. And really impressive card. Good against Steel for willpower. We all know how difficult Sisu and Daisy Duck can be. How's Genie when Steel can't challenge first into it as well? So Merlin Goat, no real explanation to any kind of deck that's looking to be aggressive and close the game out with some chip shots of lore. Same thing with Goofy. There are going to be challenging going on, as you saw the previous deck to this. The Amethyst or Amber Steel deck definitely has plenty of things to challenge. So I expect to see Goofy see a bit more play for similar reasons like that. And of course, Gathering Knowledge and Wisdom, not a great card to ever draw until late in the game, but great at closing things out. And the Library and Queen's Castle, in addition to Brawl just being generic removal spell, but the locations there really providing longevity to your deck and being able to draw past cards like Gather Knowledge and Wisdom and things you may not be able to make use of in the mid game by making your Churnbox followers and your Magic Brims, your Wendy's, Moanas all draw a card when they leave play. So really kind of tight package of aggressiveness. I think there is something here. There's no Be Prepareds, there's no Maui's, so you have a little bit more difficult time dealing with characters. Maybe it's right to play something like this, but also include Be Prepared just to have a reset button, because you probably will get to the late game. But at the expense of what, I'm not certain how to make that all work with your ink cost wise, and maybe it's not as good just having some dead cards in your hand sometimes. Who knows if you're ever going to skip ink in this deck? You might, but unlikely because of Library and Queen's Castle. But still, it is definitely something worth experimenting, and I think, again, an aggressive slant to a lot of decks is what we're going to see, and what we maybe see early. If you're looking to LCQ into the Continental Challenges, or Continental events, being aggressive is the best way to go. That being said, that does kind of play into more traditional Steel Song and Green Steel decks, but who knows what people are going to be trying. We're going to be kind of day one of legality for these cards. Not day one of like locals release, but what would be a challenge event. Day one legality for that, for the European one. So we'll see how that all plays out. And this is something, again, I'm going to work towards building on, get some opinions back and forth of, and see where people are. And if something like this is good, it very well could run away with a lot of tournaments pretty quickly. All right, another one here. I'm going to use my thing I discovered works. There we go. Cool. It worked. Finish line. Speaking of Moana, again, one of my favorite cards in the set, and one of the cards I think is going to really help define Ruby and what it can do. There are, the Moana Wendy package, just like before, some other kind of things here to help complement it. We see there's only 16 of them, but they are Amber cards. They're all supporting the location package, and one of the main locations is Sugar Rush Speedway Finish Line, the one that if you moved something from a different location to this, then you get to banish it to draw 3 cards and gain 3 lore. Very big swing. And there's a bunch of ways to do that, so let's kind of go through it. So Moana, again, paired with the shift partner this time. It was not in the previous version, not enough locations, I think, to make it truly viable there. Maybe it could be. I haven't, again, given it too much. I haven't been able to play with it yet in paper to know, but it certainly could be that in the previous deck we just saw, maybe the Moana Kakamora leader was exactly what we need to help finish games. But still, yes, Moana here, Wendy Darling, and we do have the Minnie Mouse, the Pirate Lookout. There are a lot more locations in this one. Neverland is really kind of generic, something you throw out there maybe if you have a Minnie Mouse, or if you want to set up your Fix-It Felix Jr. to draw a card on turn 2. Playing either Speedway or Neverland into Fix-It Felix is a great start. Not as aggressive as you could be, but it certainly is something. It is not really to be overlooked, just the 2-cost cantrip characters. Something to play out there where you go Sugar or Speedway starting line into Fix-It Felix into finish line and draw 3 cards. I mean, that curve where you go Speedway on 1, 2-drop, or maybe 2 1-drops on turn 2 into Speedway finish line, really great start. There is the song which lets you search for any location, which I've considered. For right now, I'm not including it intentionally. I do know it exists, and it can find locations and make the consistency in which you get Speedway more so, but there is a fair few uninkables in this deck. There's 16. There's the Minnie Mouse, Wendy Darling, Speedway and Speedway are both uninkable. So it is a tight-knit package, and to add more uninkables might not be really what you want to do, as well as there not being that many great singers right now. But yes, kind of pairing with the other 1-cost card in this deck, the cheap threats there, Taffeta Mutton Fudge. When you play it, your opponent loses lore if you have a location. That part happens, but isn't too relevant. The main reason to play that one is to be able to shift the other Taffeta when has an ability. It's a 4-cost 3/3 when you only shifts for 2. When it moves locations once per turn, you get to gain 2 lore. So being able to go back and forth between locations over the course of a few turns, gains you a bunch of lore without having to exert your character against some people trying to challenge you or unable to remove it, certainly powerful. Wendy Darling, of course, to complement Moana in the kind of aggressive slant, and Minnie Mouse to grind as the game goes on. The inkable locations, Neverland and the Underworld, again, are mostly filler. They can have a benefit. You can use the Underworld. It's certainly something you can use by questing. It does cost quite a bit of ink, but being able to recur Taffeta Mutton Fudge late game or Fix-It Felix Jr. certainly can't be understated. It is pretty efficient what it does, and yeah, you had to keep kind of all options in your arsenal. But Minnie Mouse being able to recur any of them at the right time, especially the finish line where you get to reuse the Banish to draw 3 and gain 3, is huge, and it's one of the main reasons this deck is going to work potentially. We have Tuk Tuk, which everyone's favorite evasive threat. Is a nice little answer to Diablo. We have, of course, Wendy Darling, Tuk Tuk, and Brawl as ways to enter Diablo, something you need to make sure you have some answers, at least potentially, in your deck, unless you can fully ignore it, which most can't, but some can, or most don't care. But yes, Tuk Tuk lets you move, again, to the Sugar Speedway finish line for free, or functionally for 3 ink versus 6, which 6 ink can come up. You can certainly move it for 6 to have its ability go off. More likely than not, you're going to use the starting line and or Tuk Tuk to move there, or Moana, the shift Kakamora leader. So one of those is going to make these Sugar Speedway trigger. Which one? Up to you. But I'm excited to see these kind of cards play well together. And one of the only vanilla piece, unfortunately, I wish we could play more, but none of them really have too many location synergies quite yet. It turns every location into a kind of singular Queen's Castle. So when it's at a location, so if you played starting line on turn 1 or turn 2, and you're able to move Vanellope there immediately for free because it costs 0 to move there, you get to gain a lore and draw a card out of it. So it replaces itself pretty easily, and it can be a middling threat that they decide to use removal on if they have to, or challenge a location that you're really just using to buy time. But yeah, nice little tool to have there. And Super Goof helping close things out, and so does Moana. Moana, of course, can trigger the Speedway by itself if shifted, because it can move itself to the Speedway. If your small Moana is at a different location, say you have no Speedway, but you have the Underworld or Neverland, and you have the 1-cost Moana out, then shift the big one, you can move everything over to the Speedway, and then draw cards that way, as well as gain lore from Moana. But really cool kind of setup of the deck. I do want to see what we can do here. Brawl, of course, again, just easy character interaction. And these are the locations I think that are going to be the best for this type of deck. I think you need both Speedways. I think you need some other inkable locations, and the best ones I think that you can find are here. There's certainly the possibility that a card like Wendy Darling can be removed. Having 2-cost cards is pretty important, although you do have the Speedway and the Underworld potentially. but the uninkable part of Wendy might be a little bit too much. There's just enough pirates, I think. Again, much like the deck we just saw, there's only 12 real ones: Minnie Mouse, Wendy, and Moana. With Moana, the shift line being something I doubt is going to make the Wendy Darling be turned on. I think you'll probably have a Moana in play already as a pirate, but not too many other pirates, honestly. They gave Amber some of the Pirate Matters cards, but no real good pirates. So that's a little bit awkward there. Hopefully in set 7 we see maybe a little bit more to complement it. It is almost there and almost really powerful, so maybe not too much. But yeah, love to see a few more cards there. But we do got another deck here to kind of go through. One more, again, I'm looking to experiment with, and it is a color pair you're familiar with, but not really the look you've noticed it before. And of course I'm trying, the buttons are not working there. So blue steel aggro, right? If you notice something about this video, it is very aggressively slanted. So if aggro is not for you, sorry, too bad. So what do we have? We have a lot of the same faces we saw before in the Amber Steel aggressive deck. The same ones being Happy, Calhoun, and Doc, along with Dwarven Mine. Again, I think Dwarven Mine is going to be a big part of the metagame, being something that survives pretty well. It doesn't survive Maui, of course, but I've seen a lot of people, myself included, and Ruby Amethyst there, remove Maui just for the need to answer more things, and also if Diablo's the main threat you're looking at, Maui doesn't do much there. But those cards, again, being some of the steel kind of mainstays there as a way to remove characters, as well as some babooms. No other real cards in there. Again, much more character-based. We see some cards we have not seen before. Anna, the 1/4 Anna that gets buffed if you have a hero. Calhoun's a hero, and so is what I think is going to be one of the scariest cards in the set is Alice Savvy Sailor. Sally Savvy Sailor. I don't know why that feels like a tongue twister to me, but it is. So Alice, what does Alice do? Having ward itself means it's pretty hard to deal with. This is the kind of ward on a character I actually do like, where it actually incentivizes you to quest with the card. Unlike Prince John and Bucky, where they just wanted to sit there and play until there's nothing left to happen, Alice actually wants you to quest with her, to do her thing. And being able to get that ability to at least quest, to then make it vulnerable to challenging, is kind of how we should see warded cards work, I think. Big fan of Alice. And what Alice lets us do here, which we'll get to in just a moment, is really one of the key cards I think we haven't seen too much of outside of Green Steel, is the Beast Tragic Hero. Sure, it gets hit by Medusa, right, all the time, but what if Alice can protect it? And what if you have a Pluto in play to protect Alice from, say, Maui? So one of the ideal curves in this deck would be going Alice into Pluto, quest with Alice, protect the Pluto from any kind of removal with ward, and then if that survives, then you get to go Beast, quest with Pluto, quest with Alice, and give Beast ward so it can't be removed by Medusa or Ice Block Brawl or any kind of long game Zeus. All of these things to make sure that Alice stays in play and you keep getting an advantage. Alice is incredible. Any type of combo you're trying to pull off, or you need a turn to set up, you need a character to have, actually have relevance, where you play it and you get the turn back. Alice is going to be great at that. Scary, but great. On top of that, there's a couple other cards that are worth protecting in some capacity. Gantu. It is a large man, alien, I don't know, captain, alien captain, that's what he is. So there's only 3 copies. I'm still experimenting with some of them. It is a vanilla character, meaning it has no actual other abilities other than questing. 5 costs 4/3. It's really hard to kill, but it has 4 lore. We want to end the game quick, and with Alice questing to give it 5 lore, not the turn that you play the Gantu, but the turn after, that's quite a bit of lore. And really hammering home the ability to close the game quickly is nothing to scoff at. One thing if you notice the 2 or 3 cards I mentioned here when it comes to Alice, Anna, and Pluto, they all have a lot of willpower, and that's a lot of things that you can heal with Baymax. Baymax is a pretty scary card. We haven't seen it crop up too much. Again, people are complaining that it's vulnerable to a lot of Ruby removal, which I get. Sure. Again, but Alice does protect. So let's just say a world where we have the Alice and Pluto set up, right? And then instead of questing with the Pluto, we use it to take out a character in play on the opposing side. Then we get to heal it back up with Baymax, and then protect our Baymax, and have our Pluto still exerted to protect the Alice. So a lot of synergies here working together. Doc is our kind of card draw engine here. Most of the late game cards, actually everything over the cost of 3, is inkable. It is important to kind of make sure you know where your power points are as far as ink goes, so you don't get strained with cards in hand. And it's kind of how I expected more cards. I did, when the game was first coming out, was a little bit irked by the fact that all the cool cards you wanted to have were uninkable, like Elsa and Ursula and things like that. I would really have expected more cards like Calhoun to be the uninkable ones, or Alice, which I think are the perfect uninkable cards. They really are cards you want to play. They're great, and they're early, meaning you don't have to make that awkward decision to include or not include them in your deck, so you don't feel like you can play them or get stuck with them in your hand. You just play them because they're uninkable, but they're good. So I'm a big fan of the direction for uninkable cards in this set specifically. There's a couple cards here and there that I think could have been changed, but still. Moving on here, Tadashi Hamada. There was 4 originally. I wanted to shave an uninkable just because I wanted to have a little bit more consistency, but Tadashi is a really weird one. So during your turn during your opponent's turn when it's banished, you can put the top card of your deck into your inkwell, but then he also goes into your inkwell. So you actually don't have to put the top card of your deck into your inkwell to make him go to your ink. You do have to put him into your inkwell, but you don't have to do the top part. You're likely going to do both most situations, but it's important to note that there's a situation where you may not want to put the top card of your deck. Who knows? Maybe they have a Merlin's Cottage and they, the top card of your deck. It is optional, good to know. But really, this being a 3-cost 2/2 that quests for 2, the stats aren't very impressive. Just a 2/2 for 3, which we can get that for 1. But the fact that if your opponent ever interacts with it, you get 2 ink out of the deal really makes you be able to go from kind of 0 to hero here and play some of these bigger costing cards, setting up cards like Beast and Pete in the same turn. Maybe you can go Beast plus Baboom, where you normally have to make a choice, or use all your extra ink to move cards around in 7 Dwarves Mine. While this deck doesn't cap out at much higher than 5, you do have a lot of use for your ink with 7 Dwarves Mine. I've been pretty impressed with the card in general, really. I'm surprised actually I haven't included it in more decks up to this point. But 7 Dwarves Mine is a great card, and again, combining with just even as many knights as we see here, which is only 8 total, you could play some more dwarves. I don't really like them too much in this deck. The other knight you can play is the Cinderella from set 2. Not Stout-Hearted, not 1-cost singer, but the one that draws and discards, that's also a knight. That would work with the mine, but those don't really fit too well in this deck, and I think that 8 is enough, and even dealing 1 is enough. Sometimes just dealing 1 damage when you move any character there for the first time in a turn. A-okay. One of the other cool cards I've tried out and become more and more impressed with is John Silver, Savvy Cook. So when you play it, you make something not be able to challenge. It's a pretty big tempo swing. It does let you kind of get a little bit of aggressive, especially against cards like Mim and Fox, where they may have to have a second one or anything like that to really get going. John Silver does a great job of buying time and questing and getting the beatdown going. By beatdown, I mean questing down, but you get what I mean. Solid card. I'm experimenting with it at 3. It's not, one of my favorite cards to have there, but we do need to try things, and I want to try as many things as I can. And it seems like one of the perfect inclusions there. Pete really needs no explanation here. Pete's just fantastic. And Pluto, of course, being the best guard dog ever. People could say you could play Scrooge McDuck, the uninkable 5/5, and Sapphire in that slot in a lot of ways, but I think the bodyguard is super relevant. And of course, inkable versus uninkable is one of the biggest defining cards in how we evaluate if something's good or not. But yeah, love the deck. Baboom, kind of, again, extra removal there to help empty your hand. Basil, something helps you team up to take down larger things if you need to. Having your Pluto plus Basil be able to take down a Queen's Castle is pretty nice. Basil is one of my favorite things to include in a lot of decks, and as a hero for Anna. Important to note, one of the main reasons this inclusion is for the hero count. You have Basil, Anna, Calhoun, Alice, Sad Beast, and Baymax as heroes. So quite a few heroes to make Anna into 2 lore quester, which the stat line on Anna is pretty great. Just needs a little bit of help being protected or something else to be paired with aggressive wise, which Gontu and things like that and Alice are really crucial for. So these have been the decks. Again, I'm going through a few here and a few more probably on Monday. I'm going to post this today and hopefully today. But yes, more coming soon. Let's go back to here. We're getting ready for all the decks here, the European Championship and North American Championship. In addition to those 2 events, there's also going to be the North America versus European online event through Pixelborn Connect. I'll be participating in it. I believe it starts the November 18th. So look for us there. I'm not sure exactly the platform. I'll certainly let everyone know once I know what platform it's going to be through. But we're going to be playing with new cards. I'll be playing some of these decks. Maybe the Amber Steel one, because I like Amber Steel, and hey, I'm the Amber Steel person. So a lot of fun there, but I hope you enjoyed this video as to 5 new decks to give a go in the new metagame, utilizing some of the new cards, and we're going to get 5 more coming right up soon.